hockey's greatest line? You could argue that. Tonight, we pay tribute to the Montreal Forum, but more importantly, we pay tribute to those who played here. NHL Game Night returns in a moment.
Is brought to you by Dynamic Mutual Funds, your partner for dynamic performance. And by Molson Canadian.
Welcome back to the Montreal Forum. When you talk about this place, you of course talk about the great hockey players. That's the first thing that comes to mind, but there's so much more. Think of John Philip Sousa, Pavarotti, Sinatra, Madonna, John Paul, George, and Ringo. Yes, the Beatles began a North American tour here. Great boxers like Archie Moore and Rocky Graziano. At the Olympics, Sugar Ray Leonard, and of course, Nadia Comaneci. If you thought the Forum was for men only, think of Amy Semple McPherson, the fiery American evangelist who spoke here in 1931. And think of the Yvette's Rally in 1980, when the PQ accused English women of being anti-separation. 15,000 of them came here to a rally that many think turned that referendum campaign in 1980 around. This is a special place. It's a lot more than hockey. A look back now at the history of the Montreal Forum.
My parents used to take me to the game, Montreal Canadian game, sitting on a wooded bench.
What this building has provided me with, and a whole lot of other people, are memories.
The Montreal Forum is very special to everybody growing up in Montreal, and I used to watch the Canadians when I was younger and was fortunate enough to go see them in that building.
When you come into this building, you come into this dressing room, or you come on the team, that's the first thing that you realize is you're part of a team. When you're a Montreal Canadian, you're a Montreal Canadian for life.
All those who were looking at us there from almost the ceiling, well, they were the one who built it for us. And said, now it's my turn.
It wasn't always the home ice of the Montreal Canadiens. The Forum was originally conceived in 1924 by the Canadian Arena Company to house English Montreal's expansion NHL team, the Maroons. The 9,300-seat building cost $1.5 million and was called the Forum because it was built on the site of a roller skating facility called the Forum Rink. Construction was completed in 159 days, and the Forum stood majestically with its peaked stone facade and huge glass windows. The first game was played November 29, 1924. Because the Maroons were on the road and the Mount Royal Arena where the Habs played was having artificial ice installed, the Canadiens opened the Forum with a game against the Toronto St. Patrick's. Billy Boucher scored 3 times, and Howie Morenz and Aurel Joliet each had 2 in the Canadiens' 7-1 win. They moved permanently to the corner of St. Catherine and Atwater in 1926. In 1938, the Maroons folded after winning 2 cups of their own at the Forum. The Canadiens' first true superstar was Howie Morenz. In 1937, at the age of 34, he suffered a broken leg during a home game against Chicago. A month later, he died of a heart attack. 3 days later, a memorial service was held at the Forum. A number 7 adorned the casket. 15,000 people sat in silence, and 10,000 more gathered outside.
The coffin was exposed there for a couple of days, a day and a half or 2. I remember when they took the coffin out, you know, because I was there, you know. It was a terrific ceremony, which it's the first time it happened at the Forum, and it's the last time, too.
In 1949, blue seats were added above the reds and whites, increasing the Forum's capacity to 13,551. Attendance had been a problem in the past for the Canadiens, but not anymore. The fans filled the arena to watch Maurice Richard.
The Rocket was the hard skater, you know, the fella that would go through a brick wall. We'd stand up automatically.
I never thought I was going to play professional because I had 2 years in amateur. I had two major injuries, and after that, my first year with Canadian, I was lucky to sign a contract and never thought I was going to make the team.
I follow Maurice quite a bit, and I was the guy that I wanted to be.
If you looked at him, you could just see that CH, you know, on his chest. If you looked at his eyes when he was coming in from the blue line on an opposing goaler, you knew that something exciting was going to happen.
The Rocket was also central to one of the most shameful nights in Forum history, the Richard riot. After the Rocket struck linesman Cliff Thompson during a fight in Boston, NHL President Clarence Campbell suspended the Rocket for the final 3 games of the regular season and all the playoffs. The following day, St. Patrick's Day, the Canadiens played Detroit. The mood outside the Forum was one of anger. And Clarence Campbell, along with the Rocket, went to the game. Campbell took his usual seat, Section 118, B20.
Directors of the Forum asked Campbell not to come, and he insisted coming. And we felt it, you know, we felt it when we were sitting down.
Every day you come to see the game. After a period, you go in the room. That day, you stay in the seats. Just to provoke the people.
A fan walks up the steps toward President Campbell, who was sitting about 10 rows above the ice, and stuck his hand out as if to shake hands with the president. When Campbell put his hand out, he was slapped by the fan. Then, of course, all heck broke loose.
On the corner of St. Catharines and at Montreal, you had a Royal Bank. And all of a sudden, the radio announcer said, here's a brick who's been thrown. There was a large window just went down. And, you know, there's probably hundreds and maybe thousands of people who were listening to that at home who got dressed and came to the Forum.
With their arena in tatters and without the Rocket, the Canadiens made it to the final but lost to the Red Wings in 7 games. Maurice Richard played 5 more seasons in the NHL, and he never lost the Stanley Cup again. Maurice Richard, one of the many Canadiens greats who will be here tonight, and perhaps the man who, more than anyone, epitomizes Montreal Canadiens hockey.
Well, he certainly does for me, and that's kind of odd because I grew up in the 1960s and 70s, and the Canadiens that I followed at the time were Jean Beliveau, Henri Richard, Guy Lafleur. Yet whenever I think of the Montreal Forum, whenever I think of Montreal Canadian hockey, I remember the black and white pictures of Maurice Richard, the eyes lit up, shaking hands with Sugar Jim Henry after a game, just swooping into the net, coming in on his off wing. And that for me is the Montreal Canadiens. That for me is the Montreal Forum. I always think of the greatest hockey players of all time, call them Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Gordie Howe, Bobby Orr, and Wayne Gretzky are the 3 guys that I believe are head and shoulders above everybody else. But there's a special place there for a guy like Rocket Richard because he really typified the way the game of hockey is played in Canada.
Strangely enough for me, Bob, my memory of the Montreal Forum is a living room in Sundre, Alberta, which sounds strange. My grandfather grew up not far from here, and every weekend came to Montreal Canadiens games, and the one thing he told me was, if you go to the Forum, always wear a suit and tie. We talked about people who hold this place near and dear. No one held it more closely than my grandfather, and it certainly is with a great deal of pride that I'm here tonight in a suit and tie, as you should be when you come to the Montreal Forum. We're looking back at great moments in the history of the Montreal Canadiens. Think back to the early 1970s, Guy Lafleur with the Quebec Remparts, and maybe a bit of Canadian chicanery. Sam Pollock got Oakland's first pick in the draft. It looked like L.A. might actually finish last, so the Canadiens gave Ralph Backstrom to L.A. and selected Guy Lafleur with Oakland's pick. Yes, the Seals did finish last, and the rest is history. NHL Game Night returns to the farewell of the Forum in just a moment. Live from the Forum in Montreal, TSN's NHL Game Night presents the Forum finale. Hi everybody, welcome back. A moment ago we showed you the early days of the Montreal Forum. In latter years, the great Montreal Canadiens shared the stage with Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones, and Pink Floyd. Things changed, and so did the Montreal Canadiens, except for one thing. They continued to win. We continue our look back at the Forum with the modern era of hockey's shrine. Hockey wasn't the only entertainment at the Forum. It was where the Beatles made their North American debut in 1964. In fact, the list of Forum events is virtually endless. But hockey was and is the Forum's lifeblood. The corner of Atwater and St. Catherine was busy on most weekends between November and April in the 50s. In fact, on most weekends, 40,000 spectators passed through the Forum turnstiles.
I'll come here with my 2 brothers every Sunday to see the Royals in the old Quebec Senior League. And in those years, you had sellout crowd for the Canadiens, sellout crowd for the Royals on Sunday afternoon. And on Sunday night, you had the 2 junior games.
The Canadiens won another 5 Stanley Cups in the 1960s, led by Jean Beliveau and Henri Richard. And after sweeping St. Louis for the Stanley Cup in 1968, construction began immediately as the Forum was completely renovated at a cost of $10 million. A new Forum icon was the escalator shaped as crossed hockey sticks, which greeted visitors from St. Catherine Street. 1,700 standing room tickets were made available for each game. Ushers opened the doors an hour and a half before game time, and the standing room rush developed into an exciting event which lives to this day, the victors securing excellent sight lines. The 70s gave birth to another Hab dynasty. The torch had been passed from Beliveau to Guy Lafleur. The Canadiens won 6 Stanley Cups, including 4 in a row, beginning with the 1975-1976 season. In the 1979 playoffs, the Forum Ghosts went to work. Game 7 of the semifinals. Boston led 4-3 with just over 2 minutes remaining when Don Cherry's Bruins drew a penalty for having too many men on the ice.
With a minute to go, a minute and a few seconds, Guy Lafleur just a few feet inside the blue line. A hell of a shot, you know, the inside post, and 4-4.
Lafleur coming out rather gingerly on the right side. He gives it into Lemaire, back to Lafleur.
Me, I was playing with Doug Riseborough and Mario Tremblay, then we played 7 years together. And we always had success against the Bruins. And Mario said, Yvon, I think our line has a chance to score the goal, and I think we're going to do it.
Tremblay cutting,
The Canadiens won in overtime and went on to take their 4th consecutive Stanley Cup. The Forum was also home to classic international confrontations. 1972, Game 1 of the Summit Series between Canada and the then-obscure Soviets.
6 minutes into the game, Team Canada is winning 2-0. We're all sitting back saying, well, it's like we said, 8 in a row. And then suddenly a guy named Karlamov came to play, a guy named Maltsev, somebody named Yakushev, another one named Mikhailov, and of course the big guy in the net's Tretiak. Final score, Soviet 7, Team Canada 3. What a letdown. But it was so exciting, so emotional.
What many have called the greatest hockey game ever played took place at the Forum on New Year's Eve, 1975.
Number 17, Valery Karlamov.
10 days or 2 weeks before New Year's Eve, people, they weren't talking about, you know, we're going to play against the Bruins or we're going to play against Philly. People, they were saying, are you ready to play the Red Army?
And there over the right, now he shoots at the rebound inside of the net. Petrov is coming down to the Canadian side. He's in over the line. Karlamov going in, he scores! Beautiful setup! He has it, he's centered it right in front. Here's the man shooting it! And a tremendous save, another save by Tretiak.
The Canadiens outshot the Soviets 38-13, but had to settle for a 3-3 tie. The 80s marked the end of Montreal's NHL dominance, but Forum fans were thrilled with a fierce new rivalry, the Battle of Quebec, the Montreal Canadiens and the Quebec Nordiques. Led by goaltender Patrick Roy, the Canadiens managed 2 more Stanley Cups. In 1993, with the Richard brothers looking on and new NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman sitting in Clarence Campbell's old seat, the Canadiens carried the Stanley Cup for the final time on Forum ice. Worth noting, the Stanley Cup has been presented here 15 times, 12 times to the Canadiens, twice to the Maroons, and only once to the visiting team, the Calgary Flames, back in 1989. Bob, I got to say, the first thing that I noticed coming into the Forum, 2 things. One, it seems as familiar as your own living room. When you used to come in, there was the blue dasher boards on the bottom, the immaculate seats. What other arena would have white seats? But it just seems so familiar, even if you've never been here before.
Well, everybody's obviously got great Forum stories. I remember my first visit to the Forum. It wasn't a visit into the Forum, but I came in a blinding snowstorm to come to my future brother-in-law play in the Midget National Championship in nearby Verdun. Had to pay a pilgrimage visit here, just pushed my nose up against it. It was a few years later I was able to come. I was with the Sioux Star at the time, came and did a story on Craig Hartsburg with the Minnesota North Stars, a playoff game the North Stars won. course, it's the Dallas Stars that are going to be in there tonight, and that was a great series that Minnesota went on to win in 7 games against the Montreal Canadiens. But after that, you go from Barry to Bobadon, being drafted by the Philadelphia Flyers, jumping up in excitement and jamming his feet through the seat, not being able to get down to the draft floor, to the Stanley Cup champion Montreal Canadiens most recently, and the riots out on the street, and we're all up hiding in the press room after it's all over, drinking beer and waiting for everybody to go so we can go home safely that night.
Well, there are so many great moments. You saw so many of them there. Let's talk, too, about the Canada Cups. The first Canada Cup back in 1976 was played here. When you're talking about memorable moments in Forum history, you have to talk about that. And you have to talk about the goal by Darryl Sittler that won the Canada Cup. So many moments, so much to look back on.